Happy Wednesday. How's it going? What's new? What's new with you? Erica! Hello, Erica. Marmos's feet are cold. Yeah, it's a little chilly, isn't it? I'm feeling a little chilly. But that's also partly, I think, because I'm kind of sleepy right now. I didn't really dress up because I sort of just had a nap right before this. You're eating freshly baked cookies. I'm eating not freshly baked cookie. How am I? I'm pretty sleepy. I don't know, I'm doing alright. Um, I'm kind of in the middle of getting my sleep schedule back into a more regular place. Not regular for me, but regular for, people. Um, but that's been kind of back and forth in like how much actual sleep I've been getting for the past week or so. And as I mentioned, I've been prepping to do this. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm pretty excited. Yay, Sharkies! Hello, Sharkies! Here you are. Happy Wednesday. Yeah, I hope it will be fun. Um, I am definitely excited to be doing something D&D related again. Is that a new edition? Um, it's the 5th edition version, which there have been. There was like the original adventure back in like 1987 or 89, something like that, which was the first time um, Curse of Strahd was a thing. And then there have been various takes on it since then. um, and then the 5th edition version of it, I think, is the first real remake of the original, like 1980 whatever version of it, something like that. I think. I could be mistaken on that part. Like maybe there have been other remakes of it, um, but don't post anything about it here because I'm going to be running it, and Farmhouse is going to be playing in it, and also Robot Q if he pops in. So no spoilers for them. But yes, it's going to be a little different for me because every time I mention D&D, it reminds you that you should play it with us sometimes. Yeah, no kidding. That would be fun. I'm actually going to be running our first session of this because we haven't started yet, but I'm going to run our very first session of it on Halloween. That seemed pretty fitting. So that's going to be fun. It's definitely going to be a bit different from what I'm used to because I normally run more kind of typical fantasy D&D adventures. You know, different takes, I guess, on that. But Curse of Strahd is like a horror game in genre, gothic horror. So There's some pretty dark themes to it and some pretty scary parts and things like that. Um, and that's not really something I've tackled myself before. Is that kind of genre. So we've been firing up the 3D printer some more to print some stuff off for that. And that's going to be fun. This will be the first game actually like using 3D printed stuff, because we haven't really played in a game since getting the printer and getting it running and everything. So I'm looking forward to that as well. Yeah. So I've been focusing on that a bit for the past week, roughly, thinking about that a lot. Sharkies have to finish any of the million D&D games you're currently still playing, even though they're slow going because of the plague. Yeah, that's definitely put some stuff kind of on the back burner, hasn't it? Understatement of the past 2 years right there. Yeah, everyone that's going to be involved in this game has been double vaccinated for some time, so that's a thing. And so we're going to actually, I think, attempt to play in person. And also everyone lives more or less in this area within, a 20-minute drive or so. So that helps too. So far, we've got one of our players is thinking of playing a wizard. Erica's sibling is thinking of playing a wizard. Don't know if that's 100% locked in yet. And Farmos is thinking about playing a warlock. So we've got two caster classes, and then our other two players currently have not let me know if they're thinking about a particular class or not. So I'm curious of how that's going to work out. And also, to an extent, I'm also kind of curious about what race everyone's kind of thinking, because I don't know, with the genre and with like, what the adventure actually is kind of about, I feel like it seems like it would be sort of weird to have like Dragonborn or something like that as one of the players, even though it is still D&D. But I don't know. I just can't. Like I guess I'm just thinking of like, imagine watching Dracula, only like, one of the vampire hunters or something is half dragon. It seems like it'd be kind of out of place. But like I said, it is D&D, so I guess that's just part of it. So did Erica, did you bake those cookies yourself, or did someone else bake them? FYI, you have homework to get done tonight, so they probably pop off in 40 to 45. Oh. All right, well, we'll try and, why don't we get started a little quicker then? I guess you weren't here last time, were you? Have you caught up at all, or do you have any idea where we're at? You missed the introduction of, you baked them yourself. Nice. What kind are they? You missed the introduction of Carrot, who is an honest young man, raised by dwarfs, I should say. It is spelled Dwarfs, not using the Tolkien variation. And Mr. Carrot thought himself to be a dwarf, despite the fact that he's 6 foot something and was constantly banging his head on the ceiling. You didn't get a chance to watch the stream. It was an eventful week. Would appreciate summary. Ah, s'more. Ah, yes, yes. We had those last time we were over. They were super good. Um, so, Carrot's father, the overseer of the mine shaft, uh, decided that since Carrot was starting to try and get a little friendly with another dwarf from the shaft named Minty, and I think it was Minty, Minty Rocksmacker or something like that. Um, and Minty's father wasn't too happy about that fact. Um, After consulting with a human that lived sort of in the area, the king decided to send Carrot off to Ankh-Morpork to live among humans and join the Watch, which is a right and noble profession, or at least it was like 200 years ago, which is the most recent information they've got about it. Um, so Carrot visited with this local human who was by the name of Varneshi, Mr. Varneshi. And Mr. Varneshi gave Carrot a book which was the rules and regulations and laws of Ankh-Morpork. The laws and ordinances of the cities of Ankh and Morpork, which belonged to his like great grandfather, and also gave Carrot a protective, which was a cup. It was a cup, and there was some delicate explaining of what that's about. Carrot was somewhat embarrassed by that and stashed it away in his pack. And Carrot was also given a sword, which was found with the wagons that he was found with, which were basically attacked by bandits. And the sword is very extraordinarily non-magical. Not a hint of magic to it, which is very strange for a sword in Discworld, I guess. So, it's basically just a sword. Yeah. Also, the brethren, the elucidated brethren, summoned up a dragon, and it were able to sort of maybe kind of control it for about 10 seconds before that consumed all of the magic items, quote unquote magic items, that they had gathered up. And then I guess it vanished back to wherever it came from. And but just before it did that, it burnt up a local thief, a thief who, and we had our introduction to death as well. This poor thief getting killed by a dragon. Am I forgetting anything, Farmos, Sharkies? Anything that we need to remember about what happened in the last stream? I think those are probably most of the important points. There was a pretty great bit about how all dwarfs go by he because it's not really anybody's business. Gender is more or less optional. Farmos thinks that's probably it. Sharkies think that's about it. Alright, so that's roughly where we're at. Yeah. So where the elucidated brethren are at now is they want to gather up more magical items, and both in quantity and quality, and in quantity of items and quantity of magic in said items, so that they can do a better job of summoning up the dragon. Alright, so we're on page 53. Dearest father, wrote Carrot, well, here I am in Ankh-Morpork. It is not like at home. I think it must have changed a bit since Mr. Varneshi's great-grandfather was here. I don't think people here know right from wrong. I found Captain Vimes in a common alehouse. I remembered what you said about a good dwarf not going into such places, but since he did not come out, I went in. He was lying with his head on the table. When I spoke to him, he said, "Pull the other one, kid. It has got bells on." I believe he was the worse for drink. He told me to find a place to stay and report to Sergeant Colin at the watch house tonight. He said anyone wanting to join the guard needed their head examined. Mr. Varneshi did not mention this. Perhaps it is done for reasons of hygiene. I went for a walk. There are many people here. I found a place. It is called The Shades. Then I saw some men trying to rob a young lady. I set about them. They did not know how to fight properly, and one of them tried to kick me in the vitals, but I was wearing the protective, as instructed, and he hurt himself. Then the lady came up to me and said, was I interested in bed? I said yes. She took me to where she lived, a boarding house, I think it is called. It is run by a Mrs. Palm. The lady, whose purse it was, she is called Reet, said, "You should have seen him. There were 3 of them. It was amazing." Mrs. Palm said, "It is on the house." She said, "What a big protective." So I went upstairs and fell asleep, although it is a very noisy place. Reet woke me up once or twice to say, "Do you want anything?" But they had no apples. So I have fallen on my feet, as they say here, but I don't see how that is possible because if you fall off your feet. It is common sense. There is certainly a lot to do. When I went to see the sergeant, I saw a place called the Thieves' Guild. I asked Mrs. Palm, and she said, "Of course." She said the leaders of the thieves in the city meet there. There's so many random words in here that are just capitalized, just randomly throughout. She said the leaders of the thieves in the city meet there. I went to the watch house and met Sergeant Colin, a very fat man, and when I told him about the Thieves' Guild, he said, "Don't be a idiot." I do not think he is serious. He says, "Don't you worry about thieves' guilds. This is all what you have to do. You walk along the streets at night, shouting, 'It's 12 o'clock and all's well.'" I said, "What if it is not all well?" And he said, "You bloody well find another street." This is not leadership. I have been given some chainmail. It is rusty and not well made. They give you money for being a guard. It is $20 a month. When I get it, I will send you it. I hope you are all well and that shaft number 5 is now open. This afternoon I will go and look at the Thieves' Guild. It is disgraceful. If I do something about it, it will be a feather in my cap. I am getting the hang of how they talk here already. Your loving son, Carrot. P.S. Please give all my love to Minty. I really miss her. Carrot is liberal with his capitals, yes, and also his commas. There are a lot of commas in that letter. The Sharkies, something of that letter reminds me of the Steve Martin movie, The Jerk. Yeah, possibly the tone of voice, but also, yes, his letters home in that were reminiscent. That's definitely a good connection. I love that movie. Lord Vetinari, the patrician of Ankh-Morpork, put his hand over his eyes. He did what? "I was marched through the streets," said Erdo Van Pew, current president of the Guild of Thieves, Burglars, and Allied Trades. In broad daylight, with my hands tied together. He took a few steps toward the patrician's severe chair of office, waving a finger. You know very well that we have kept within the budget, he said. To be humiliated like that, like a common criminal. There had better be a full apology, he said, or you will have another strike on your hands. We will be driven to it, despite our natural civic responsibilities, he added. The naivety, yes, yeah. It was the finger. The finger was a mistake. The patrician was staring coldly at the finger. Van Pew followed his gaze and quickly lowered the digit. The patrician was not a man you shook a finger at, unless you wanted to end up being able to count only to 9. And you say this was one person? Said Lord Vetinari. Yes, that is... Van Pew hesitated. It did sound weird, now he came to tell someone. But there are hundreds of you in there, said the patrician calmly. Thick as, you should excuse the expression, thieves. Van Pew opened and shut his mouth a few times. The honest answer would have been yes, and if anyone had come sidling in and skulking around the corridors, it would have been the worse for them. It was the way he strode in as if he owned the place that fooled everyone. That, and the fact that he kept hitting people and telling them to mend their ways. The patrician nodded. I shall deal with the matter momentarily, he said. It was a good word. It always made people hesitate. They were never quite sure whether he meant he'd deal with it now, or just deal with it briefly. And no one ever dared to ask. Van Pew backed down. A full apology, mark you. I have a position to maintain, he added. Thank you. Do not let me detain you, said the patrician, once again giving the language his own individual spin. Right. Good. Thank you. Very well, said the thief. After all, you have such a lot of work to do, Lord Vetinari went on. Well, of course this is the case. The thief hesitated. The patrician's last remark had barbs on it. You found yourself waiting for him to strike. He said, hoping for a clue. With so much business being conducted, that is? Panic took over the thief's features. Randomized guilt flooded his mind. It wasn't a case of what had he done, it was a question of what the patrician had found out about. The man had eyes everywhere, none of them so terrifying as the icy blue ones just above his nose. I don't quite follow, he began. Curious choice of targets. The patrician picked up a sheet of paper. For example, a crystal ball belonging to a fortune-teller in Shears Street, a small ornament from the temple of Offler, the crocodile god, and so on. Gewgaws. I am afraid I really don't know, said the head thief. The patrician leaned forward. No unlicensed thieving, surely, he said. Footnote 1. One of the remarkable innovations introduced by the patrician was to make the Thieves' Guild responsible for theft, with annual budgets, forward planning, and, above all, rigid job protection. Thus, in return for an agreed average level of crime per annum, the thieves themselves saw to it that unauthorized crime was met with the full force of injustice, which was generally a stick with nails in it. End of footnote. I shall look into it directly, stuttered the head thief. Depend upon it. The patrician gave him a sweet smile. I'm sure I can, he said. Thank you for coming to see me. Don't hesitate to leave. The thief shuffled out. It was always like this with the patrician, he reflected bitterly. You came to him with a perfectly reasonable complaint. Next thing you knew, you were shuffling out backwards, bowing and scraping, relieved to simply be getting away. You had to hand it to the patrician, he admitted grudgingly. If you didn't, he sent men to come and take it away. When he'd gone, Lord Vetinari rang the little bronze bell that summoned his secretary. The man's name, despite his handwriting, was Lupine Wants. He appeared, pen poised. You could say this about Lupine Wants. He was neat. He always gave the impression of just being completed. Even his hair was so smoothed down and oiled, it looked as though it had been painted on. Not like me. The watch appears to be having some difficulty with the Thieves' Guild, said the patrician. Van Pugh has been in here claiming that a member of the watch arrested him. What for, sir? Being a thief, apparently. A member of the watch? Said the secretary. I know. But just sort it out, will you? The patrician smiled to himself. It was always hard to fathom Lord Vetinari's idiosyncratic sense of humor, but a vision of the red-faced, irate head thief kept coming back to him. One of the patrician's greatest contributions to the reliable operation of Ankh-Morpork had been, very early in his administration, the legalizing of the ancient Guild of Thieves. Crime was always with us, he reasoned, and therefore, if you were going to have crime, it at least should be organized crime. And so the guild had been encouraged to come out of the shadows and build a big guild house, take their place at civic banquets, and set up their training college with day release courses and city and guilds certificates and everything. In exchange for the winding down of the watch, they agreed, while trying to keep their faces straight, to keep crime levels to a level to be determined annually. That way, everyone could plan ahead, said Lord Vetinari, and part of the uncertainty had been removed from the chaos that is life. And then, a little while later, the patrician summoned the leading thieves again and said, Oh, by the way, there was something else. What was it now? Oh, yes. I know who you are, he said. I know where you live. I know what kind of horse you ride. I know where your wife has her hair done. I know where your lovely children, how old are they now? My, doesn't time fly? I know where they play. So, you won't forget about what we agreed, will you? And he smiled. So did they, after a fashion. And in fact, it had turned out very satisfactorily from everyone's point of view. It took the head thieves a very little time to grow paunches and start having coats of arms made and meet in a proper building rather than smoky dens, which no one had liked much. A complicated arrangement of receipts and vouchers saw to it that, while everyone was eligible for the attentions of the guild, no one had too much, and this was very acceptable, at least to those citizens who were rich enough to afford the quite reasonable premiums the guild charged for an uninterrupted life. There was a strange foreign word for this. Insuer ants. No one knew exactly what it had originally meant, but Ankh-Morpork had made it its own. The watch hadn't liked it, but the plain fact was that the thieves were better at controlling crime than the watch had ever been. After all, the watch had to work twice as hard to cut crime just a little, whereas all the guild had to do was to work less. And so the city prospered, while the watch had dwindled away, like a useless appendix, into a handful of unemployables who no one in their right mind could ever take seriously. The last thing anyone wanted them to do was to get it into their heads to fight crime. but seeing the head thief discommoded was always worth the trouble, the patrician felt. Erica, man, this organized crime thing sounds swell. And Farmo says it just needs to be very well organized, right? Captain Vimes knocked very hesitantly at the door, because each tap echoed around his skull. Enter. Vimes removed his helmet, tucked it under his arm, and pushed the door open. Its creak was a blunt saw across the front of his brain. He always felt uneasy in the presence of lupine wants. It's spelled L-U-P-I-N-E, so I'm saying lupine, but it could be lupin. It's probably, I don't know, lupine or lupin. What do you guys think? Come to that, he felt uneasy in the presence of Lord Vetinari. But that was different. That was down to breeding. And ordinary fear, of course. Whereas he'd known Wants since their childhood in the Shades. The boy had shown promise even then. He was never a gang leader. Never a gang leader. Hadn't got the strength or stamina for that. And after all, what was the point in being the gang leader? Behind every gang leader were a couple of lieutenants bucking for promotion. Being a gang leader is not a job with long-term prospects. But in every gang, there is a pale youth who's allowed to stay because he's the one who comes up with all the clever ideas, usually to do with old women, and unlocked shops. This was Wance's natural place in the order of things. Vimes had been one of the middle rankers, the falsetto equivalent of a yes-man. He remembered Wants as a skinny little kid, always tagging along behind in hand-me-down pants with the kind of odd skipping run he'd invented to keep up with the bigger boys, and forever coming up with fresh ideas to stop them idly ganging up on him, which was the usual recreation if nothing more interesting presented itself. It was superb training for the rigors of adulthood, and Wants became good at it. Yes, they'd both started in the gutter, but Wants had worked his way up, whereas, as he himself would be the first to admit, Vimes had merely worked his way along. Every time he seemed to be getting anywhere, he spoke his mind, or said the wrong thing, usually both at once. That was what made him uncomfortable around Wants. It was the ticking of the bright clockwork of ambition. Vimes had never mastered ambition. It was something that happened to other people. Ah, Vimes. Sir, said Vimes woodenly. He didn't try to salute, in case he fell over. He wished he'd had time to drink dinner. Wants rummaged in the papers of his desk. Strange things afoot, Vimes. Serious complaint about you, I'm afraid, he said. Wants didn't wear glasses. If he had worn glasses, he'd have peered at Vimes over the top of them. Sir? One of your night watch men. Seems he arrested the head of the Thieves' Guild. Vimes swayed a little and tried hard to focus. He wasn't ready for this sort of thing. Sorry, sir, he said. Seem to have lost you there. I said, Vimes, that one of your men arrested the head of the Thieves' Guild. One of my men. Yes. Vimes' scattered brain cells tried valiantly to regroup. A member of the Watch, he said. Wants grinned mirthlessly. Tied him up and left him in front of the palace. There's a bit of a stink about it, I'm afraid. There was a note. Ah, here it is. This man is charged with conspiracy to commit crime under Section 14 III of the Great Felonies Act 1678 by me, Carrot Ironfounderson. Vimes squinted at him. 14 III. Apparently, said Wantz. What does that mean? I really haven't the faintest notion, said Wantz, dryly. And what about the name? Carrot? But we don't do things like that, said Vimes. You can't go around arresting the Thieves' Guild. I mean, we'd be at it all day. Apparently this Carrot thinks otherwise. The captain shook his head and winced. Carrot? Doesn't ring a bell. The tone of blurred conviction was enough even for Wantz, who was momentarily taken aback. He was quite... The secretary hesitated. Carrot, he said. I've heard that name before. Seen it written down. His face went blank. The volunteer, that was it. Remember me showing you? Vimes stared at him. Wasn't there a letter from, I don't know, some dwarf? All about serving the community and keeping the streets safe, that's right. Begging that his son would be found suitable for a humble position in the watch. The secretary was rummaging among his files. What had he done? Said Vimes. Nothing. That was it. Not a blessed thing. Vimes' brow creased as his thoughts shaped themselves around a new concept. A volunteer? He said. Yes. He didn't have to join. He wanted to join. And you said it must be a joke, and I said we ought to try and get more ethnic minorities into the watch. You remember? Vimes tried to. It wasn't easy. He was vaguely aware that he drank to forget. What made it rather pointless was that he couldn't remember what it was he was forgetting anymore. In the end, he just drank to forget about drinking. A trawl of the chaotic assortment of recollections that he didn't even try to dignify anymore by the name of memory produced no clue. Do I? He said helplessly. Wantz folded his hands on the desk and leaned forward. Now look, Captain, he said. Lordship wants an explanation. I don't want to have to tell him the captain of the night watch hasn't the faintest idea what goes on among the men under, if I may use the term loosely, his command. That sort of thing only leads to trouble. Questions asked, that sort of thing. We don't want that, do we? Do we? No, sir, Vimes muttered. A vague recollection of someone earnestly talking to him in the bunch of grapes was bobbing guiltily at the back of his mind. Surely that hadn't been a dwarf. Not unless the qualification had been radically altered at any rate. Of course we don't, said Wantz, for old time's sake, and so on. So I'll think of something to tell him, and you, Captain, will make a point of finding out what's going on and putting a stop to it. Give this dwarf a short lesson in what it means to be a guard, all right? Ha, said Vimes dutifully. I'm sorry, said Wantz. Oh, thought you made an ethnic joke there, sir. Look, Vimes, I'm being very understanding, in the circumstances. Now, I want you to get out there and sort this out. Do you understand? Vimes saluted. The black depression that always lurked ready to take advantage of his sobriety moved in on his tongue. Right you are, Mr. Secretary, he said. I'll see to it that he learns that arresting thieves is against the law. He wished he hadn't said that. If he didn't say things like that, he'd have been better off now. Captain of the Palace Guard, a big man. Giving him the watch had been the patrician's little joke. But Wantz was already reading a new document on his desk. If he noticed the sarcasm, he didn't show it. Very good, he said. Let's see. Farmo says the internet says Lupin, and Erica says Lupin, pronounced Hermione. Nice. Dearest Mother, Carrot wrote, it has been a much better day. I went into the Thieves' Guild and arrested the chief miscreant and dragged him to the patrician's palace. No more trouble from him, I fancy. And Mrs. Palm says I can stay in the attic because it is always useful to have a man around the place. This was because, in the night, there were men the worse for drink, making a fuss in one of the girls' rooms, and I had to speak to them, and they showed fight, and one of them tried to hurt me with his knee, but I had the protective, and Mrs. Palm says he has broken his patella, but I needn't pay for a new one. I do not understand some of the watch duties. I have a partner, his name is Nobby. He says I am too keen. He says I have got a lot to learn. I think this is true, because I have only got up to page 326 in the laws and ordinances of the cities of Ankh and Morpork. Love to all, your son, Carrot. P.S. Love to Minty. It wasn't just the loneliness. It was the back-to-front way of living. That was it, thought Vimes. The night watch got up when the rest of the world was going to bed, and went to bed when dawn drifted over the landscape. You spent your whole time in the damp, dark streets, in a world of shadows. The night watch attracted the kind of people who, for one reason or another, were inclined to that kind of life. He reached the watch house. It was an ancient and surprisingly large building, wedged between a tannery and a tailor who made suspicious leather goods. It must have been quite imposing once, but quite a lot of it was now uninhabitable and patrolled only by owls and rats. Over the door, a motto in the ancient tongue of the city was now almost eroded by time and grime and lichen, but could just be made out. Fabricati Diem, PVNC. It translated, according to Sergeant Colin, who had served in foreign parts and considered himself an expert on languages, as to protect and to serve. Yes, being a guard must have meant something once. Sergeant Colin, he thought as he stumbled into the musty gloom. Now there was a man who liked the dark. Sergeant Colin owed 30 years of happy marriage to the fact that Mrs. Colin worked all day and Sergeant Colin worked all night. They communicated by means of notes. He got her tea ready before he left at night. She left his breakfast nice and hot in the oven in the mornings. They had 3 grown-up children, all born, Vimes had assumed, as a result of extremely persuasive handwriting. And Corporal Nobbs, well, anyone like Nobby had unlimited reasons for not wishing to be seen by other people. You didn't have to think hard about that. The only reason you couldn't say that Nobby was close to the animal kingdom was that the animal kingdom would get up and walk away. And then, of course, there was himself. Just a skinny, unshaven collection of bad habits marinated in alcohol. And that was the night watch. Just the 3 of them. Once there had been dozens, hundreds, and now just 3. Vimes fumbled his way up the stairs, groped his way into his office, slumped into the primeval leather chair with its prolapsed stuffing, scrabbled at the bottom drawer, grabbed bottle, bit cork, tugged, spat out cork, drank, began his day. The world swam into focus. Life is just chemicals. A drop here, a drip there, everything's changed. A mere dribble of fermented juices, and suddenly you're going to live another few hours. Once, in the days when this had been a respectable district, some hopeful owner of the tavern next door had paid a wizard a considerable sum of money for an illuminated sign, every letter a different color. Now it worked erratically and sometimes short-circuited in the damp. At the moment, the E was a garish pink and flashed on and off at random. This is where you get the John Wayne. Sharky say that's definitely not what the Latin means. Yeah, no, Fabricati Diem. Yeah, that's why I paused there going, hang on a second. To protect and to serve. Yeah, I don't think that's what Fabricati Diem means. Vimes had grown accustomed to it. It seemed like part of life. He stared at the flickering play of light on the crumbling plaster for a while, and then raised one sandaled foot and thumped heavily on the floorboards twice. After a few minutes, a distant wheezing indicated that Sergeant Colin was climbing the stairs. Vimes counted silently. Colin always paused for 6 seconds at the top of the flight to get some of his breath back. On the 7th second, the door opened. The sergeant's face appeared around it, like a harvest moon. You could describe Sergeant Colin like this. He was the sort of man who, if he took up a military career, would automatically gravitate to the post of sergeant. You couldn't imagine him ever being a corporal, or for that matter, a captain. If he didn't take up a military career, then he looked cut out for something like, perhaps, a sausage butcher. Some job where a big red face and a tendency to sweat even in frosty weather were practically part of the specification. He saluted and, with considerable care, placed a scruffy piece of paper on Vimes's desk and smoothed it out. "Evening, Captain," he said. "Yesterday's incident reports and that. Also, you owe 4 pence to the tea club." "What's this about a dwarf, Sergeant?" said Vimes abruptly. Colin's brow wrinkled. "What dwarf?" "The one who's just joined the watch. Name of..." Vimes hesitated. "Carrot or something." "Him?" Colin's mouth dropped open. "He's a dwarf? Oh, he said you couldn't trust them little buggers. He fooled me all right, Captain. The little sod must have lied about his height." Colin was a sizist, at least when it came to people smaller than himself. "Do you know he arrested the president of the Thieves' Guild this morning?" "What for?" "For being president of the Thieves' Guild, it seems." The sergeant looked puzzled. "Where's the crime in that?" "I think perhaps I had better have a word with this carrot," said Vimes. "Didn't you see him, sir?" said Colin. "He said he'd reported to you, sir." I must have been busy at the time. Lot on my mind," said Vimes. "Yes, sir," said Colin, politely. Vimes had just enough self-respect to look away and shuffle the strata of paperwork on his desk. "We've got to get him off the streets as soon as possible," he muttered. "Next thing you know, he'll be bringing in the chief of the Assassin's Guild for bloody well killing people. Where is he?" "I sent him out with Corporal Nobbs, Captain. I said he'd show him the ropes, sort of thing." "You sent A raw recruit out with Nobby, said Vimes wearily. Colin stuttered. Well, sir, experienced man, I thought. Corporal Nobbs could teach him a lot. Let's just hope he's a slow learner, said Vimes, ramming his brown iron helmet on his head. Come on. When they stepped out of the watch-house, there was a ladder against the tavern wall. A bulky man at the top of it swore under his breath as he wrestled with the illuminated sign. It's the E that doesn't work properly, Vimes called up. What? The E. And the T sizzles when it rains. It's about time it was fixed. Fixed? Oh, yes, fixed. That's what I'm doing all right. Fixing. The watchmen splashed off through the puddles. Brother Watchtower shook his head slowly and turned his attention, once again, to his screwdriver. Men like Corporal Nobbs can be found in every armed force. Although their grasp of the minutiae of the regulations is usually encyclopedic, they take good care never to be promoted beyond, perhaps, corporal. He tended to speak out of the corner of his mouth. He smoked incessantly, but the weird thing Carrot noticed was that any cigarette smoked by Nobby became a dog end almost instantly, but remained a dog end indefinitely, or until lodged behind his ear, which was a sort of nicotine elephant's graveyard. On the rare occasions he took one out of his mouth, he held it cupped in his hand. He was a small, bandy-legged man, with a certain resemblance to a chimpanzee who never got invited to tea parties. His age was indeterminate, but in cynicism and general world weariness, which is a sort of carbon dating of the personality, he was about 7,000 years old. A cushy number, this route, he said, as they strolled along a damp street in the merchant's quarter. He tried a door handle. It was locked. You stick with me, he added, and I'll see you're all right. Now you try the handles on the other side of the street. Ah, I understand, Corporal Nobbs. We've got to see if anyone's left their store unlocked, said Carrot. You catch on fast, son. I hope I can apprehend a miscreant in the act, said Carrot zealously. Yeah, said Nobby uncertainly. But if we find a door unlocked, I suppose we must summon the owner, Carrot went on, and one of us would have to stay to guard things, right? Yeah? Nobby brightened. I'll do that, he said. Don't you worry about it. Then you could go and find the victim. Owner, I mean. He tried another doorknob. It turned under his grip. Back in the mountains, said Carrot, if a thief was caught, he was hung up by the... He paused, idly rattling a doorknob. Nobby froze. By the what? He said in horrified fascination. Can't remember now, said Carrot. My mother said it was too good for them anyway. Stealing is wrong. Nobby had survived any number of famous massacres by not being there. He let go of the doorknob and gave it a friendly pat. Got it, said Carrot. Nobby jumped. Got what? He shouted. I remember what we hang them up by, said Carrot. Oh, said Nobby weakly. Where? We hang them up by the town hall, said Carrot. Sometimes for days. They don't do it again, I can tell you. And Bjorn Strong in the Arm's your uncle. Nobby leaned his pike against the wall and fumbled a fag end from the recesses of his ear. One or two things, he decided, needed to be sorted out. Why did you have to become a guard, lad? He said. Everyone keeps on asking me that, said Carrot. I didn't have to. I wanted to. It will make a man of me. Nobby never looked anyone directly in the eye. He stared at Carrot's right ear in amazement.
You mean you ain't running away from anything? He said.
What would I want to run away from anything for? Nobby floundered a bit.
There's always something. Maybe you was wrongly accused of something. Like maybe, he grinned, maybe the stores was mysteriously short on certain items and you was unjustly blamed. Or certain items was found in your kit and you never knew how they got there, that sort of thing. You can tell old Nobby. Or, he nudged Carrot, perhaps it was something else, eh? Cherchez la femme, eh? Got a girl into trouble?
Carrot began, and then remembered that, yes, one should tell the truth, even to odd people like Nobby who didn't seem to know what it was. And the truth was that he was always getting Minty in trouble, although exactly how and why was a bit of a mystery. Just about every time he left after paying calls on her at the Rocksmacker cave, he could hear her father and mother shouting at her. They were always very polite to him, but somehow merely being seen with him was enough to get Minty into trouble.
Yes, he said. Oh, often the case, said Nobby wisely.
All the time, said Carrot. Just about every night, really.
Blimey, said Nobby, impressed.
He looked down at the protective.
Is that why they make you wear that, then?
What do you mean?
Well, don't worry about it, said Nobby. Everyone's got their little secret. Or big secret, as it might be. Even the captain. He's only with us because he was brung low by a woman. That's what the sergeant says. Brung low.
Goodness, said Carrot. It sounded painful.
But I reckon it's 'cause he speaks his mind. Spoke it once too often to the patrician, I heard. Said the Thieves' Guild was nothing but a pack of thieves or something. That's why he's with us. Dunno, really.
He looked speculatively at the pavement and then said,
So, where are you staying, lad?
There's a lady called Mrs. Palm, Carrot began. Nobby choked on some smoke that went the wrong way.
In the shades? He wheezed. You're staying there?
Oh, yes.
Every night?
Well, every day, really, yes.
And you've come here to have a man made of you?
Yes.
I don't think I should like to live where you come from, said Nobby.
Look, said Carrot, thoroughly lost. I came because Mr. Varneshy said it was the finest job in the world, upholding the law and everything. That's right, isn't it?
Well, said Nobby. As to that, I mean, upholding the law. I mean, once, yes, before we had all the guilds and stuff. The law sort of thing ain't really, I mean, these days everything's more, oh, I don't know. Basically, you just ring your bell and keep your head down.
Nobby sighed. Then he grunted, snatched his hourglass from his belt, and peered in at the rapidly draining sand grains. He put it back, pulled the leather muffler off of his bell's clapper, and shook it once or twice, not very loudly.
12 of the clock, he muttered, and all's well.
And that's it, is it? Said Carrot, as the tiny echoes died away.
More or less, more or less.
Nobby took a quick drag on his dog end. Just that? No moonlight chases across rooftops? No swinging on chandeliers? Nothing like that? Said Carrot.
Shouldn't think so, said Nobby fervently. I never done anything like that. No one ever said anything to me about that.
He snatched a puff on the cigarette.
A man could catch his death of cold chasing around on rooftops. I reckon I'll stick to the bell if it's all the same to you.
Can I have a go? Said Carrot. Nobby was feeling unbalanced. It can be the only reason why he made the mistake of wordlessly handing Carrot the bell. Carrot examined it for a few seconds. Then he waved it vigorously over his head. 12 o'clock, he bellowed, and all's well!
The echoes bounced back and forth across the street, and finally were overwhelmed by a horrible, thick silence. Several dogs barked somewhere in the night. A baby started crying. "Shh!" hissed Nobby. "Well, it is all well, isn't it?" said Carrot. "It won't be if you keep on ringing that bloody bell. Give it here." "I don't understand," said Carrot. "Look, I've got this book Mr. Varnashee gave me." He fumbled for the laws and ordinances. Nobby glanced at them and shrugged. "Never heard of 'em," he said. "Now just shut up your row. You don't want to go making a din like that. You could attract all sorts. Come on this way." He grabbed Carrot's arm and bustled him along the street. "What sorts?" protested Carrot as he was pushed determinedly forward. "Bad sorts," muttered Nobby. "But we're the watch." "Damn right. And we don't want to go tangling with people like that. Remember what happened to Gaskin." "I don't remember what happened to Gaskin," said Carrot, totally bewildered. "Who's Gaskin?" "Before your time," mumbled Nobby. He deflated a bit. "Poor bugger. Could have happened to any of us." He looked up and glared at Carrot. "Now stop all this, you hear? It's getting on my nerves. Moonlight bloody chases my bum." He stalked along the street. Nobby's normal method of locomotion was a kind of sidle, and the combination of stalking and sidling at the same time created a strange effect, like a crab limping. But, said Carrot, "in this book it says—" "I don't want to know from no book," growled Nobby. Carrot looked utterly crestfallen. "But it's the law," he began. He was nearly terminally interrupted by an axe that whirred out of a low doorway beside him and bounced off the opposite wall. It was followed by sounds of splintering timber and breaking glass. "Hey, Nobby!" said Carrot urgently. "There's a fight going on!" Nobby glanced at the doorway. "Of course there is," he said. "It's a dwarf bar. Worst kind. You keep out of there, kid. Them little buggers like to trip you up and then kick 12 kinds of shit out of you. You come along old Nobby and he'll—" He grabbed Carrot's tree-trunk arm. It was like trying to tow a building. Carrot had gone pale. "Dwarfs drinking and fighting?" he said. "You bet," said Nobby. "You bet," said Nobby. "All the time. And they use the kind of language I wouldn't even use to my own dear mother. You don't want to mix it with them. They're a poisonous bunch of— Don't go in there!"
Let me catch up. Oh no, I think Ereker left. Alright, let's see. Sharky saying, as opposed to the chimps who do get invited to tea parties. Yeah, that's a strange bit there. He looks like a chimp that doesn't get invited to tea parties. Farmos, good Nobby voice. Sounds like you got something in your mouth. Well, it said he speaks out of the corner of his mouth, so I'm trying to do that. Talking out of the corner of my mouth. And that was when Ereker disappeared to do homework. Sharkies love the visual of a world in which there are neon lights, magical or otherwise, but time is kept by individuals with hourglasses in the pocket. Farmo says it's a beautifully strange mix of magical and old-timey. Yeah, there's a little bit of language in this book. Yeah, well, I mean, the tavern owner did specially pay a wizard to make the sign. So I imagine they're not everywhere, but it definitely adds an ambiance. I don't know. It'd be interesting to run something like that in a D&D game. It's part of Discworld's charm. It's got, modern world, real world things, but with a magical fantasy twist on them. Shifted so that they fit into the Discworld. What time are we at? It's 8:05. Let's take a look at this next scene. It goes on for a bit with Carrot doing a bunch of stuff here, it seems like. So I think this might be a good place to stop for the night, as there is actually a little break here. Farmos agrees. Sharky saying a little bit proto-steampunk. It's interesting. I mean, I would say it is it's a fantasy version, kind of in that way, right? Steampunk is like Victorian, like science stuff, right? Like it's an alternate Earth setting where science has gone a slightly different direction. And so this is sort of like that, but with magic instead. Yeah, magic punk. Possibly, yeah. Or clock punk, you guess more accurately? Maybe. It's a tough, yeah, I don't know. I wonder if there is a good way to categorize the Discworld in that way. Because I know there are, let's see, I know there's like magic cyberpunk, and that would be like, what's it called? There's a game series, something. It's like Blade Runner, but not. I'm drawing a blank right now. I think I recently maybe got some of those games as part of a bundle or something. No, I'm not thinking of Bioshock or Numenera. It's older than both of those. Take a quick look at my library. It's actually, I think, a spin-off of D&D originally. But for some reason I'm just blanking on the name of it. Like Shadow Runner or something like that. Shadowrun? I think it's Shadowrun. Yeah, Shadowrun. Shadowrun is like a fantasy version of the cyberpunk genre, where you've got like elves and trolls and things, but they're, hacking corporations. So this is not quite that, because it's not cyber. Yeah, I feel like Shadowrun would take a lot of reading ahead of time to really kind of get the feel for the lingo in the world. I'm not particularly familiar with it myself. I haven't played it myself. I know some people who have. But yeah, and entertaining. Not quite so much Monty Python in this past bit that we just read, today's episode, as it were. It's still a little strange not having chapters to go by, so I've kind of got to play it by ear. But Carrot, not quite fitting in right at home in Ankh-Morpork, arresting the head of the Thieves Guild for being the head of the Thieves Guild. What the heck? And I feel like I haven't quite got Vimes' voice yet, but Vimes hasn't really had many lines yet, and he hasn't quite found his own footing in this book, I think. So we'll figure out Vimes' voice when he becomes a little more Vimes-like. Right now, he's not quite who he's going to be. Yeah, a bit more establishing the protagonist, that's for certain. Lots of Carrot, a little bit of Colon, and lots of Nobby, too. More Nobby, I think, than you frequently get in some of these books. Nobby is usually around, but he doesn't usually take up the spotlight. Interesting cast of characters. And Brother Watchtower up there with the sign, the magic sign. Fixing it. Yeah, that's what he's doing, fixing it. Getting a little more ambitious, I think. I didn't quite realize it. I should have looked ahead to see who it was at the top of the ladder, because I didn't quite use the right voice for Brother Watchtower. Because I wasn't sure who it was myself. That's a tricky thing in these books, when you've got like voices for people, but then they don't put a name to someone, and so you're kind of like, whose voice is this? Who am I reading? Sharkies loves a good ensemble cast. Oh boy. All right. Well, I think that's it for tonight. Um, I'm not going to bother trying to figure out someone to rate out on since there's only the three of us here, anyways. Farmo says, and the watch is a good ensemble. Um, Happy Wednesday. Hopefully, we'll see you back here on Friday. It's still I'm still not quite used to this schedule because it's like Wednesday and Friday are so close together, and then there's so much time between Friday and the following Wednesday. I always like I'm partway through Tuesday and going, oh, it's been forever since I did the stream. Sharky say, and there's still at least one main character left to introduce. At least one. I can think of a certain female character in this book. Okay. I think that's it. It's a little just after 10 past 8. Yes, that's what you're thinking of. Yeah, that'll be... I can already picture the voice for that one. Whether or not I can pull it off, I'm not sure, but I can picture the voice. Okay. Well, have a good night. And I hope you have a good Thursday and Friday. Oh, someone just showed up, and just as we're finishing up, I'm sorry that you're here for the end of it. We've been, in case you're not familiar, we've been reading through Guards by Sir Terry Pratchett. And we'll be here starting again on Friday at 7 p.m. Pacific time. 7 p.m. Pacific, not Eastern. I don't know what Eastern time it is, but 7 p.m. Pacific. If you want to catch up with us on Guards. I've also got all of what we've read so far is posted up on YouTube. If you search Sleet Reads on YouTube, you can find it there if you want to catch up on the book. 10 p.m. Eastern. All right. Well, have a good night. And I will see you all on Friday, I hope. Bye-bye. Whoop.